Humans have a built-in physiological response we rarely think about. When we experience sudden, extreme shock or fear, blood drains from the face. The skin goes white. It is a completely involuntary reflex, controlled entirely by the autonomic nervous system. From a purely survival standpoint, this is a terrible design flaw. If a predator is hunting you in the brush, the absolute last thing you want is for your face to suddenly turn a bright, contrasting color that makes you easy to spot. This reaction only makes sense if the threat was another human. Because we are social, we are uniquely tuned to reading the faces of our own kind. The sudden appearance of a rival was dangerous enough and frequent enough that our bodies evolved to prioritize a rush of blood to our muscles over the need for camouflage. It reveals a long ancestral history of humans being a primary danger to one another. But a biological fear of strangers is a reaction to one-on-one aggression. War is a different mechanism entirely. War requires organized, collective, strategic violence between groups. And the moment we look at when that specific behavior actually started, the timeline of human history breaks open. The archaeological record is built on bones, and bones carry the permanent marks of how they were broken. The oldest unambiguous evidence of organized group slaughter comes from a site called Nataruk in Kenya. Around 10,000 years ago, a group of 27 people, men, women, and children, were massacred, their hands bound and their skulls crushed by another organized group of humans. 10,000 years sounds incredibly ancient, but anatomically modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. On that timeline, organized warfare only appears in the final 4% of our existence. We have a massive 96% vacuum with no clear evidence of mass organized conflict. This missing evidence doesn't mean our ancestors were peaceful angels for 290,000 years. It means the specific social and economic conditions required to organize, fund, and execute large-scale warfare simply did not exist. For that 96% of our history, humans lived as mobile hunter-gatherers. Constant movement places a hard physical limit on what a group can own. You can only keep what you can physically carry across the landscape. Without storehouses of food or permanent settlements, there is virtually zero accumulated material wealth to fight a war over. Because they were constantly on the move, these early human bands possessed a built-in release valve for social tension. If a conflict escalated with a neighboring group, they didn't have to stand their ground and fight. They could simply pack up, walk away, and put physical distance between themselves and the threat. These small bands also operated with highly egalitarian social structures. Without rigid hierarchies, there was no central authority figure capable of forcing individuals to follow strict military orders, much less compelling them to risk their lives in a coordinated attack. You need an objective, a vulnerable target, and a command structure. Without wealth to steal, an unmovable location to defend, or a rigid hierarchy to enforce discipline, the mechanics of warfare fail before they can even begin. All of those natural barriers to conflict collapsed around 12,000 years ago with the development of agriculture. Months of planting and irrigating meant human labor was suddenly tied to a specific piece of earth, gaining a permanent productive value. A successful farming harvest yields more food than a community can immediately eat. That caloric excess can be dried, sealed in containers, and stored in granaries. Farming created massive stockpiles of non-renewable wealth. This generated a brutal new economic math. Attacking a nomadic group yields almost nothing. But attacking a farming settlement allows a rival group to secure a year's worth of calories without doing a single day of the labor required to grow it. Predatory violence and raiding became highly rational. Unlike hunter-gatherers, farmers cannot simply walk away from a dispute. Abandoning a field means starvation. Forced to stay and protect their immovable investments, settled humans had to start digging defensive ditches and raising physical walls. The invention of agriculture did not alter our underlying biology. The capacity for violence was always present. What changed were the incentives. The accumulation of permanent, tied-down wealth made organized theft and territorial defense an economic necessity. As communities committed to defending their surplus, the archaeological record reveals a dark shift in technology. Early stone tools were multi-purpose, used for butchering animals or woodworking. But eventually we find items like this heavy stone mace. it is functionally useless for anything other than crushing a human skull. A community surrounded by walls and equipped with specifically designed anti-personnel weapons requires people willing to use them. This constant defensive posture birthed an entirely new social identity, the dedicated warrior, bound by a culture and ideology that justified collective violence. By 2450 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia, the Sumerians had institutionalized this warrior class into massive armies. This stone relief shows soldiers in a phalanx, a dense infantry formation requiring immense social coordination. Notice the identical helmets and perfectly locked shields. This drilled synchronization proves warfare evolved into a permanent institution funded by the state. As militaries grew, the costs escalated. The introduction of the chariot in ancient Egypt revolutionized battlefield mobility, but it was enormously expensive. Breeding horses, building specialized vehicles, and training dedicated drivers required a level of taxation and centralized administration that only massive hierarchical societies could support. Rome transformed the warrior into a component of a massive administrative machine. Maintaining a legion required more than weapons. It demanded a network of paved roads, a medical corps, and a payroll system stretching across continents. A self-perpetuating feedback loop locked into place. You needed a complex, wealthy state to fund the massive logistics of an army, and you needed the violence of that army to conquer the resources required to maintain the state. The ancient humans who initiated these early wars were not uniquely evil or driven by mindless bloodlust. They were reacting rationally to an entirely new set of material circumstances, where survival often meant taking a neighbor's grain before they could take yours. Yet, the archaeological record also holds evidence of ancient trading networks and political systems that managed to exchange their agricultural surplus rather than raiding for it. They resolved conflicts through negotiation and shared interests, proving that armed conflict is absolutely not the only possible response to competition. War is an invention. It is a specific piece of social technology developed by human beings to solve immediate problems of resource allocation, territorial boundaries, and group identity. Assuming that war is simply a biological instinct, hardwired into our species alongside hunger or the fear of a stalking predator, is dangerous. That fatalistic view renders us powerless, suggesting that large-scale destruction is an inescapable destiny. The archaeological record reveals that warfare is a variable, not a constant. Because it has a specific start date linked to certain material conditions, we can see it as a response to circumstances, rather than an inevitable feature of being human. The conditions that generate conflict are not permanent features of the physical universe. If we recognize how material realities, resource distribution, and social structures drive us to violence, we have the power to arrange them differently. We invented the machinery of war, which means eventually we can invent a way out of it.